Welcome to the Silhouettes of Success podcast with your host, successful entrepreneur, broker, and business mentor, Amber Weitzer. Because success comes in all shapes, sizes, and styles, the Silhouettes of Success podcast is shining the light on industrious women with a collection of curated conversations of intentional inspiration designed to inspire your heart, ignite your mind, feed your soul, and gift you with actionable insights directly from inspirational, everyday women who've shown tenacity, grit, and grace, having taken on the challenges in their lives and business and won. Remarkable, down-to-earth, and relatable, Amber and her guests will share with you uplifting and extraordinary real-life success stories, motivational ideas that just might help spark something within you. With the deepest desire to serve you, help you grow so you can begin to shine the light that will illuminate your very own silhouette of success. So, let's get to it.
Hello and welcome to the Amber Weitzer podcast, Silhouettes of Success. Our VIP featured guest is a professional speaker, author, founder, and CEO of Corporate Rehab, an acclaimed professional coaching consultancy. She has spent 20 years as an executive in corporate America, counseling Fortune 500 companies on growth strategy and digital transformation. Her new book, Corporate Rehab, Ditch the Hustle Culture and Thrive Again, just released in October of this year. So excited to hear more about that with her. Silhouettes, let's welcome Jennie Blumenthal to the show. Hello, Jennie, how are you?
I'm great, Amber. Thanks so much for having me. I'm excited to be here.
Well, we are thrilled to have you and to talk with you as you share your Silhouette of Success story. So let's kick it off. Yeah, let's do this. Let's kick it off by having you share more about your background and the early shaping of your Silhouette of Success with the audience.
Sure. So I can maybe start with the end of the story, or at least this chapter, and then we can gotta go backwards because it gives you a little context. But the idea of corporate rehab was really born out of me leaving my executive job of 20 years in corporate America. But the story, as you mentioned, didn't start there. I think, was shaped by a hardworking family that really focused a lot on drive and ambition and family and balance. But as I started to climb that corporate ladder and added 2 kids and a husband with his own career and a group of friends, it became really hard to balance everything. And so I found myself hustling for my own worth, constantly outside of myself. The answer to the 25th hour in the day was just around the corner, and the next app I was going to purchase for scheduling. And maybe next week would be a little easier. And so that's a little bit of my silhouette in terms of how I got to where I am. Very proud of the corporate career that I had in many ways. But there was also this deep lack of fulfillment towards the end of that chapter of my career. And when I pivoted and left and said, I'll do something else, my 2 kids were having school at the kitchen table in the middle of a global pandemic. And I thought, boy, I can't go into the next thing until that's resolved. So I better actually look at myself and figure out, the reason I stayed in the job as long as I did. Was it good for me at some point and I outgrew it? Were there things in me that kept me there longer than was good for me? Or were there things in my environment that were actually keeping me stuck? And that's where I started to dive into the research for the book. I started coaching other women. And that's what gave birth to Corporate Rehab, which was really a joke at the beginning that's what I was putting myself through. But it turns out with, over 53% of executive women burning out today, a lot of us need that, where we're just feeling a little pushed too much because of hustle culture, and we need a chance to reconnect with ourselves.
Okay, you had me at the beginning. I'm I'm scribbling my notes as fast as I can write because I say this and I say it all the time, but it's so true. There are times where okay, there's these questions and they're great prep questions and all of this. And then you just start getting into different things and you've got to get in the moment. So I've got to ask you about a couple, you talk about the hustles and sometimes it's the hustle and grind,
Yes.
and so the data, we are hearing more and more, of course, as it's probably being more tabulated and accessible to us. And you just mentioned 53%. The data is crazy on
Mhm.
how the pandemic has, in this one capacity we're talking about, really focused on the women leaving the
Yes.
workforce,
Yes.
and not necessarily voluntarily, if you will,
Right.
but circumstantial, right?
That's right. That's right. Yes, and I think to your point, some of it's, I guess maybe if I had to choose voluntary versus involuntary on a form, it might be marked as voluntary, but to your point, it's really driven by the lack of structure around a lot of these women as I started to interview them and found out that so much of it we can point right back to caregiving, where there's either, there's no national caregiving structure that's been put on, on the table in any meaningful way to alleviate. And so when those, daycares and schools shut down, and people had to make a choice of whose career is going to take the hit and and stay home while the kids are home from school, a lot of times it was the women. So I think that was the one big thing I found, is that there's a caregiving piece to this whole thing that needs to be figured out. And then the other piece is, there was this, then this is part of the equation, but this burnout is falling more heavily on women's shoulders, and executives, as I talk to people, than it is men. And there's probably a couple of reasons for that, but when I looked at some of the data and I spoke to people to get their individual stories, you've got the caregiving piece. You've got, in most couples, the data has now said that, women spend 20 hours a week more than their male counterparts if they're in in a marriage with a man and a woman. And that really dictates that if a woman's already doing a full-time job, now she's doing a job and a half. And so when you think about burnout, it's very easy to look at a workplace and say hours, or look at your own boundaries, which are definitely part of the equation. But what we're seeing now is women are burning out at home and they're burning out at work, and so it's leading to this crisis where we're losing these top talented women across the board because they're getting to a point where they say, I just can't do this anymore. And it's been interesting, you saw the first wave with the great resignation, now heading towards what seems to be a recession. You'd expect that to, flip the other way. And instead, what we're seeing is what, McKinsey and Lean In called the great breakup, where women are walking away, and not necessarily from corporate America. A lot of times they're choosing jobs that are a better fit for, something in their own meaning or purpose. Maybe they have a better salary or benefits package. And oftentimes, what we're hearing is there's just a better culture of respect and belonging. And so I think that that combination is really driving this perfect storm of women being the larger percentage of the resignations or of the job changes.
Well, there's you just mentioned a moment ago betterment. So, with that promise of betterment, let's talk more in detail about you and all of this amazing work that you've put into both your career, your business, the book, and all of these things pulled together. Let's talk about this. So, we look as women at each other and we think, oh, especially social media and the access we have into our lives. And we think, how does she do it? And you mentioned that 25th hour, trying to find that 25th hour, borrow from tomorrow. So, sharing any best practices, or talk to us about a day in the life of. So, the alarm clock goes off and your work or business day begins. Are you structured with a routine? Are you more spontaneous? How do you kind of fit it in your day?
Yes, great question. So I am more structured. I think that is something that I've probably always been. I think my old structure was 30-minute meetings every half hour of other people's priorities. And that happens when you're leading, a global team and a large amount of people. But I think I allowed other people's priorities to be a little bit more dictating the structure of how my time and energy got consumed. So these days, it's definitely structured, but I make sure that I pick the three things that have to get done that day to advance the goals that I've set for the quarter. And by doing that, I really stay aligned with advancing the things I know that will move the needle the most before I get to the other things that I maybe want to do. And they're not always, when I say it's in the quarter, it's not always revenue goals or business growth goals. I just wrote this book. And so a lot of it was, trying to figure out how I was going to craft the message and making sure that every day I was thinking about the data and the stories and the insights and the articles I was reading to pull that together. And then other quarters or other goals have been, launch my coaching business or, reach out to build additional partnerships. And so it changes, but I think the structure of having those three goals, plus I start out every day with gratitude, which I know is a practice you'll probably see on anybody's Instagram or, a meme. But boy, has it made a difference, because I think before, when I was running and just hustling, really caught in the hustle culture where you're really stuck on a high gear all the time, I would start the morning with a prayer and then I would just jump right in and try to tackle everything, versus now I really try to center myself a little bit and, start a little bit with being thankful for not only what I have, but all of the opportunities and invitations I'm going to get that day to help other people. So it is structured, but it's almost structured to create a little bit more connection with myself and a little bit more openness to the things that might come across my path when I'm not hustling with my head down.
So much self-discovery in
Mhm.
what you say. Wow, I love that. You mentioned earlier when we were visiting in the beginning and you were sharing about your perhaps outgrowing the situation or the role in corporate America, and were you stuck? So on that note, how do you get unstuck when maybe you have a goal, and you just talked about setting quarterly goals, so this is so timed well. But how do you get over or through a seeming barrier between that goal and dream? How do you get unstuck?
Yeah, for me, I tend to, and this is part of what I coach on, is really look at like what are the mindsets and what are the patterns that are holding me back? Like,
Mm.
is it a fear of, either not being enough or failing, or in some cases being successful? What if this all works and then I have to do it all? Is it something that's happening in my head, or is this a pattern or some sort of behavior that I'm doing that is keeping me from that goal? And so typically I'll find that when I do get stuck, it's one of those two things. And really starting to ask myself some questions to figure that out. And then, to try to shift that, sometimes it's telling myself a new mantra or a new, tape to play on the soundtrack between your ears. Things like, I'm plenty enough. I was born enough and I have all the skills and capacities, or I have everything I need to accomplish this goal. Maybe I haven't learned this extra skill yet, or I haven't mastered this other piece of it yet, but it'll come. And so that, to me, I think shifts me from this, fixed mindset of my skills and abilities are fixed in place and I'm not enough, into this growth mindset that I just haven't learned that piece yet, or I haven't mastered that skill. So that's one thing I do to shift. The other thing to get unstuck, a lot of times these answers are in our bodies. And it's interesting to me, before I went through this whole process and of self discovery, I would notice I would do things, but I wouldn't understand why. And I used to sing when I was really stressed. And you could ask my former colleagues, because I would try to be quiet in the office, but it would always be hard to do. But I noticed a song would come into my head, and it happened to be the exact lyrics of whatever emotion I was going through. I just wasn't in touch with, my feelings at work. And so it was this way for my body to say, "Hey, you're stressed out," or "Hey, you need to go run around the block," or, "Hey, you need some time to calm down a little bit." So I know that was one from Taylor Swift that I would sing. And so it's kind of a funny, this message, from my body and soul to me. And so that's the other thing I do to get unstuck, is usually tend to move or try to listen to what I think I need. And sometimes it's a walk. Sometimes it's a glass of water. Sometimes it's getting out in nature or wrestling with my dog. But it really just, tapping into the answers we already have within us can be really powerful.
As an independent business owner, but dare I say, going into this, where does the coach get coached? So where do you turn to for support when you need it?
Yes, I have my own coaches, and I think
Yeah.
anybody who is worth their salt in any level has their own advisors. Every CEO I've ever worked with has had their own, whether it's an executive coach or a board of personal advisors. In my book, I call it gathering your crew for that piece of the journey. So I do have coaching, both on growing my business and then individual parts of the business that I'd like to extend. And then I'm a huge believer in therapy as of maybe 42 years old. I wish I had found it a lot earlier in life, but it's great to have somebody who can help you with some of these mindsets as you're learning. These are a skill like anything else, unless we were lucky enough to have kind of mental or social or emotional health taught to us some point during our lives. A lot of us are finding this later in life, and it's a huge gift that should be democratized, in my opinion, so that everyone has access to it. But I think that, someone who can help you as you start to recognize some of these mindsets and beliefs and turn them over and understand if they're still serving you or not is invaluable. So I would say that I've got my own coaches. I've got I've got therapy to lean on, and then my husband's been on this journey with me. So we are frequently sharing podcasts and articles together, and between those sources, it's usually a good boost.
You talk about mindset, and I agree with you. We're realizing just how vital it is to even be clear and cognizant of the word mindset, to focus in on that. So, talking through, I love that you shared about singing, and that how do you rest and recharge your mindset after maybe an exhausting or emotionally stressful, as we talk about, situation or day? What practices work for you?
So I'm trying meditation. I will be the first to admit that I am not good at it yet, but I'm getting better. But that definitely is something that helps me just calm, some of the, whether it's outright anxiety, whether it's racing thoughts, whether it's just the overwhelm that comes with doing a lot. So that kind of forces me to be still. And there's times where I do it the formal way where you let your thoughts drift past you and don't focus on some. And then there's times where I find where I get super still is when I have my best business ideas and I need to stop the meditation and write them down. So it's a little bit of both. But my go to, we live right near this huge nature preserve in Washington, D.C., if you can believe it, because it's not what you'd first think of. I can hear crickets on my front porch and I have a nature preserve in my backyard. But I usually go there with the dog and sometimes the kids and my husband as well. But it is my go-to to recharge in nature because it really just that the rest of the world kind of melts away, but it also puts things in perspective. Whatever that challenge is you're facing, or the proposal you didn't get submitted, or the person that's having a really hard time and you're trying to think through the right guidance to give, all of that kind of melts away, and you feel a little bit small, but in a good way, I guess, in the world. So I think those are my go-to's for recharging.
Thinking, and I want to have you share as much as you are ready to share and want to share about your book. The inspiration, we you shared maybe the why and how it came together, but the inspiration to really get out there and talk to these women, where did that come from? What was your
Yeah.
drive in that? Yeah, break that
Yeah.
down for us.
Yeah, so the context is, when I left my job, I was probably at the height of that career, I'll say, where I was, running a business unit of, leading 300 people, a $300 million business unit. I was on planes 3 times a week. So I was by the career success definition killing it and poised to take on another big role. But the reality was, beneath the surface, I had this small voice saying, I just don't think this is quite right for me. And I'm doing this supposedly so I can show my kids what a strong woman looks like chasing her dreams, but it's costing me 60 hours a week to show them how wonderful this all is, and I'm stressed out all the time. And so when I finally left, it was this great big like sigh of, okay, let me just take a minute and see what I do next. And so I had a ton of people who reached out who said, well, wait a minute, like your career was who we were modeling ourselves after. Like, what happened and what do you do next? And maybe either being kind and wanting to help or being a card carrying people pleaser at that point in my life. I had calls with all of them. So I talked to like 75 people on my way out. And all of them were asking me, wow, it sounds like at that point we wouldn't have known the term burnout, but, it sounds like you're unfulfilled, or it sounds like, you want to enjoy more of your life, which was the case. And, tell me what you wind up doing. Or they would reach out and say, I'm feeling kind of burned out too. Like, can you send me an article that you liked, or your own process as you go through this? And so when I wasn't even intending to write a book. I actually thought I would leave. I would, probably go to therapy for the first time in my life. As soon as the kids would go back to school, then I'd vault into another career, but I would just do it locally so I wouldn't have to travel. But because we were in a pandemic and everything was shut down, the reality was the kids weren't going back to school. And that really forced me to be quiet and sit with this a little bit. And I started reading and consuming as much as I could about the neuroscience of leadership and mental and emotional health and habits and patterns and energy and all these things that, through intense schooling and getting my MBA, I'd never been exposed to. And so when I started cataloging this and people would start asking, oh, you've been gone a couple months. How are things going? Or what, advice do you have for me? I started sharing it. And it became so overwhelming to send people all of these books and articles that I wound up breaking down the process I was following to really rehab from the hustle culture into a framework of like, here's the steps I went through, and here's the podcast to listen to, or the other books to read, and here's the major concepts. And once I distilled that, it actually turned into the book. I thought, boy, I'm giving this away to so many people who so need it that I should just capture this in a book. And I started telling people, and the requests just started pouring in of, oh my gosh, I have a situation, I've got a story, you need to hear my story, and I have a toxic work culture, or I just got burned out, or I got unfulfilled, or I had that happen to me and now I'm in my 50s, let me tell you how I did it. And so it really was almost by accident that it became a book. But the inspiration, honestly, and I included their stories in the book. The inspiration honestly came from the amount of pain that I was hearing from all of these women that I spoke to, and including my own pain that I was exploring as I, thought about what kept me trapped in the hustle culture, both within myself, keeping it in place, and the environments that I was in. And it really came to a point, and what kept me going in writing the book was these women deserve to have their stories told. They've felt this pain and they figured out a way to get through to the other side. And so many of us think we're alone. We're the only ones going through this. Everyone else has it together, as you said. And that's not the case. We all have, different things that we're dealing with, but the burnout and a lot of it from the hustle culture and caregiving is very real. And so that's really what inspired me to add their stories to the book and make sure that they were told, because I felt this extreme honor of having them been shared with me and this responsibility to carry them out into the world.
Well, it is overwhelming in the fact that you did it, number one, because that means that we are all forever grateful having access to that resource that you took the heart and energy and time and love and devotion to pull together and then share. Because as you discovered, there is such a craving,
Hmm.
um, a desperation and craving to know that you're not alone in it.
Yes.
And
Yes.
they might parallel with somebody else's. Every story is different, what we
Right.
talk about, but there's so many relatable situations, especially, as women, that you do go through in some form or capacity, similar, and so grateful that you did that and have
Thank
done that.
you.
Thank you.
Yeah.
Watching the clock here, my lady. So, can I squeeze a couple more in? Because I
Sure.
wanna okay, great. So This might be something that you've shared. It might be completely different. It's more of a two-part question. So, thinking about a time or event or key situation in your professional life, former or current, was there ever a time that you really had to make a monumental shift within your business or career, positive or painful? How did you grow through that situation with that result?
Yeah, I mean, the biggest example I have is just my own story of burning out and deciding that I had to do something else. And I think the way I processed a lot of that pain was to write the book. I wouldn't recommend that for everyone, for sure. It's not a super overnight process for doing that. But I think the biggest thing in all of that that I'd like to focus on, because not so much to congratulate me, but for anybody who's listening and thinking about this, the bravery that it takes to stop and get quiet and actually ask yourself the questions you might have been running from, I think is the hardest part. Everything after that is a roller coaster of highs and lows. When you're feeling everything and actually, no longer running from these questions that scare you, but the bravery it takes to stop and say, this isn't working anymore, without that flashing billboard that says, look over here, your purpose is this way. You're kind of wandering in the darkness for a little while. But I think it's the bravest thing we can do to actually listen to the voice inside us that says something's off and this isn't quite right, and I can't tell you the answer, but you got to get off the path that you're on. So that's probably my biggest example of that. And then pivoting into entrepreneurship has been an interesting journey with that too. It certainly wasn't what I necessarily set out to do after, advising $30 billion companies. It's very different, the decisions that you're making, at this scale as you're starting to grow a company that's brand new. But I finally understand what it feels like when they say do something you love and you'll never work a day in your life, because it's fun. There's still stress. There's still a lot of hustling at certain times to get certain things done, but I certainly don't feel like I'm stuck in the hustle culture anymore based on the work that I've done. And I'm so excited to be able and grateful to be able to help coach other women on how to do their own rehab from the hustle culture. It's just a gift.
Well, we're blessed and thrilled that you are doing it as well. Forever grateful on that. We talked earlier about your book, so that's going to be number one here on the list that we'll have in the show notes. You also mentioned diving in and doing your research and different things. Do you happen to have any resources or a favorite resource that you'd want to share with the audience?
Sure. I try to link as much as I can on my website, which I know will be in the show notes, but that's corporate-rehab.com, where I try to put articles and podcasts and the like that I think have been helpful. I think if I had to pick two resources that I really loved, the one that sparked maybe some of this curiosity of, is this really what I'm meant to do, was Untamed by Glennon Doyle, where she just challenges the notions of the things that she thought were true. And so I think it gave me a little bit of a push to say, maybe I can ask some of those questions too. And then as I started to go through all of these concepts of, neuroplasticity and trauma and emotional intelligence and all of these things that I didn't really know, the depth of, Nicole LaPera's How to Do the Work was an invaluable resource, and she's awesome on Instagram. If you're short on time for reading, she's got great content that she puts out that's very consumable. So I think those two things, I would count myself in very good company of recommending those.
Wonderful. Thank you. Thank you for that. All right, my lady. I hate to let us go, but we
No,
I always like to
this
respect
was
everyone's
fun.
schedule. Darn it, right when you start getting into, okay, well,
I
what about
know.
this? It has been awesome and amazing visiting with you today and keeping the promise to share intentional inspiration with our audience. Do you have a piece of key go-to advice that resonates with you or that you like to share with others that you'd like to pass on to the audience?
I think it's probably one last piece, I guess, of inspiration that probably started this whole process for me, as I found an inscription of this quote I had never actually heard before. That's actually pretty famous, of Mary Oliver's. That's, "Tell me, what will you do with this one wild and precious life?" And I think if you just ask yourself that, we still have to pay the rent, we still have to pay the mortgage, but thinking intentionally about, how we want to spend our time and our energy and our gifts is probably one of the most purposeful things you can do. So fitting that into your daily schedule can be hard, but I think it's really important. So that's the best advice I would think I would give.
That is remark I've never heard that one
Oh,
either.
it's beautiful. It's so
Wow.
beautiful. I
It
might
is
have messed it up
beautiful.
a little bit, but it's the opening to my
No.
book. It's a gorgeous it's a gorgeous quote, and I actually found it inscripted on this piece of driftwood, and it just called out to me, and I bought
Oh,
it, and then it kind of, 2 years later really drove this whole transformation. So I just love it.
it was waiting for you.
Yes, I agree.
Uh-huh. Oh, I love that. Okay, goosebump moment. Okay, milady, the stage is completely yours. Where can our audience go to find and connect with you and support you on in your continued success, whether you want to share your socials? Again, teaser, we will have them here, but I want you to be able to share anything you'd like with the audience.
Sure. Thank you. So my website's probably the best, which is corporate-rehab.com. I've got resources on there for female executives, people in transition, and a lot of female entrepreneurs who I do a decent amount of coaching and workshops for. And then I'm on LinkedIn, Instagram, Facebook, and, to my teenagers' chagrin, TikTok. So hope to see you there.
Love it. Love it. Oh, Jenny, it has been a delight visiting with you. And thank you for sharing your silhouette of success story with us. You are a true light and inspiration for us all.
Thank you so much, Amber. I really appreciated the time, and it was wonderful to get to speak with you.
Thank you again. Until next time.
Thank you for joining us on this episode of the Silhouettes of Success podcast. If you enjoyed the show, make sure you subscribe so you don't miss out on all the new episodes. We are here for you and with you. We encourage you to share this podcast on all your socials and pass on the light to help illuminate another silhouette of success. To find out the latest ways to inspire your heart, ignite your mind, and gain actionable insights, subscribe at thesilhouettesofsuccess.com or connect with us on Facebook, LinkedIn, and Instagram. We're grateful that you've tuned in. Remember, you are exactly where you need to be, right here with us. This is the Amber Weitzer podcast, Silhouettes of Success.